Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here is your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. We did as well. Very busy here. I'm sure many of you were busy as well. Maybe some of you were able to kick back and relax. Whatever the case, I hope you had a great weekend. Maybe you even watched the Colts win. I got to tell you, I'm not a fan, an NFL fan like I once was for a lot of reasons. I still will watch it, but I got to tell you, I was not expecting that. I was not expecting Daniel Jones to come out and look like possibly the offensive player of the week in the NFL. It's incredible to watch that. They put a thumping on the Miami Dolphins. I feel bad for Tua Tagovailoa. He looked awful against the Colts. Anyway, some of you may have watched football, relaxed. Who knows what you did, but I hope you had a good weekend. My friends, we've got plenty of stuff that I want to get to today. I want to talk about a couple of things in particular here. First, as I pull up my stack here, I want to give you an update about H.R. House Resolution 4405. That is the Epstein Files Transparency Act. There's not really an update to give you. I just told you that I would stay on top of this for you and let you know there are still, as far as I know, 206 signatures. I think they've actually got 216 that are pledged or whatever. They just need a couple of more to force this vote on the House floor, bypassing the leadership of Speaker Mike Johnson and the committee rules and all that sort of stuff. So we'll see where this goes. But beyond that, I want to talk about Trump in Chicago. I want to talk about Zoran Mamdani, who's running, of course, as a communist for mayor in the city of New York. He had an interview with Abby Phillip on CNN, and even Abby Phillip thought that this was a little bit too much. She couldn't understand why Mamdani wants to have state-run or city-run grocery stores when other places have tried this and they failed miserably. We will get to that. And then lastly, I want to get to something. If you've followed the news, you know that there is information, or the Trump administration is trying to make changes to some of the Smithsonian Institute displays and some of the things that, I don't know if you've been to Washington, D.C. along the National Mall, that area is just full of Smithsonian museums. And a lot of these museums, we talk about the 7 pillars of propaganda on this program. A lot of these things, this is part of the government. It's a subtle way to push some of this leftist, liberal theory down the minds or into the minds of the American public. And you end up having things that are anti-American or that just are not very patriotic. I don't want a version of history that's totally whitewashed of reality. But I also certainly don't want, and I don't think it's healthy, for a nation to not have pride in itself. There's a lot of good things that have come from this nation. And you lose that when you have people who hate America and who want to push a leftist agenda running organizations or in charge of some of these displays and things that happen at the Smithsonian. And I want to talk about that because it's reminded me of a trip that my wife and I took to Jamestown, Virginia. Some of the things I remember reading on placards there. So we'll get to all this if we can. And that's where we're trying to head in due course, my friends. But before we get started, let me remind you that MyPillow has partnered with this program for about 2.5 years now. We use the products here in the Huff household. I've got their pillow, sheets, towels. The dogs have a dog bed. Oz and I have slippers. Oz loves her slippers. That's her favorite item. But they've got a lot of good products at MyPillow. Many of you have bought these products. MyPillow says thank you. I say thank you. But for those of you who haven't purchased, or maybe you have made a purchase and you're just looking for another item of comfort to help with your sleep, whatever the case may be, check it out, mypillow.com. They got a wide variety of products, and you'll get a discount by using promo code Todd during the checkout process. And again, they've got slippers and towels and dog beds and pillows, lots of types of pillows as well. Check those out. It's a good night's sleep. It's comfort. You won't be disappointed in the quality you'll get from MyPillow. MyPillow.com, promo code Todd. All right, let us start, my friends. I've actually got an article here. You're not going to believe when I tell you this, who it is. But this is with People.com. Do they still call this People Magazine? I guess not. But People.com, I believe, I've mentioned when I was a juror in a case that I've mentioned on here several times, many times, I am pretty certain I remember reading an article about the case that I was a juror on in People. That's probably the last time I've looked at People.com, and that was in 2018. Would have been after the trial, when people had said that it had gotten media attention. I found that I think it was here. Anyway, so I don't go here very often, but I found this today, and it's relevant. There's stories like this all over the place. But here we go. Headline: Donald Trump uses AI image inspired by Apocalypse Now to threaten Chicago with, quote, war. We're not going to war. We're going to clean up our cities, Trump later said while addressing the September 6th Truth Social post. So this is written by Bailey Richards, September 7th, over the weekend. That would have been yesterday. There's a little box at the beginning. I'll go ahead and read you this. Need to know. This is what you need to know. 3 things that they say you need to know. Donald Trump used an AI image to seemingly threaten war on the city of Chicago on September 6th. Okay. The image depicted him as Robert Duvall's character in Apocalypse Now. I've not seen, Oz, have you seen that? Have you? I got to be honest. I don't know anything about that. But Trump used AI to put himself into the character of Robert Duvall from that movie from 1979. Anyway, so that's the first bullet point. Second one here says J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson were quick to fire back against the president. Of course they were. They always are. We're not going to war. We're going to clean up our cities, Trump told reporters while addressing the Truth Social post on September 7th. Here we go. Donald Trump is once again using an AI likeness to share a strong message. On September 6th, the president, 79, posted an AI-generated image of himself on Truth Social, along with a threatening message directed toward the city of Chicago. Now, I just want to point this out. They put his age here, 79, which is a fact. Trump is 79 years old. I don't take issues with facts, but listen, I would encourage you, if you've got the time, to just go back and read articles about President Joseph Robinette bribery prior to, you got to do it prior to the debate he had with Trump, the first and only presidential debate Trump had with Biden in 2024, would have been in late July. Go back in any article written before that time. I would suspect the number of times, the percentage of times that they reference the age in the article like this, which is a fact. I'm not being bothered by that. I'm bothered by the double standard here. The subtle message that's being pushed here, and they didn't say it, so there's plenty of plausible deniability, is that Trump is too old to be running this country. Trump is senile, Trump is dangerous, all that sort of stuff. Now, I want to say, I'm 47, I'll be 48 later this year, body of a 46-year-old still, though. But that's one of my favorite jokes to say. My friend J. Dot likes to use that, and I've stolen that. But I am, You can recognize that as we all age, that things change, right? We develop, we just change. Our bodies change, our minds change, sometimes for the good as we age, sometimes for the better. Sometimes we lose some of our mental clarity and focus and that sort of thing. But it's not a universal thing. Some people never really have it. Maybe they lose a step or two, but nothing substantial. I'm reminded of people like Warren Buffett. I'm reminded of Zig Ziglar. I know he worked, he got worse later. But my goodness, some of these folks work for a long, long time, work their entire lives, and are quite good at speaking on stage and answering questions and doing media appearances and staying sharp. There's not if you're older out there or more seasoned, as Rush used to say, a seasoned citizen, do not believe for a moment. I deal with this with my parents a little bit, who are now both officially in their 70s. I think sometimes people begin to anticipate this. Oh, I've hit 70 or whatever the number is in your head, in our heads. And some folks will think I just, I can't be, I've lost my memory, or I don't think as clearly as I once did. It's great to be self-aware, but don't be overly critical of yourself. Don't put that pressure, don't put that expectation into your mind, because that doesn't have to be that way. And I think sometimes people expect it. And again, being realistic versus fearful, just, hey, I might be losing a little bit of my quickness of thought at some point as I age. That's one thing, but to live in fear and to think every time you misplace your keys that you have advanced onset dementia or some such thing, that's not necessarily the case, right, at all. So, and there's not a certain age where everybody has the same. We're all different. We're all different. We all age differently. We all struggle with different things. We all have certain levels of health or wellness or whatever. It's different from different people. But I would go back and defy you to find how often they talked about Biden's age until they decided it was time to push this guy out of the Oval Office, until it was time to replace him with Kamala. Because I don't think that they wanted to make a big deal about this. In fact, I mean, this is the whole thing with Jake Tapper, and I always forget the other guy, the name of the other guy who wrote the book with Tapper, which I've told you not to buy, which you can do what you want, but I have pleaded with you not to buy it, because it's just, you're rewarding people who kept information from you when it was relevant, and when it was totally irrelevant, the condition of the President of the United States after he's out of office. Now they want to go out and sell books and tell us what they knew and then pretend like they didn't know it at the time. They absolutely knew this stuff, my friends. I was talking about this when Biden ran in 2020. The things Biden said in 2020 were not gaffes. Biden's always been a one-man gaffe machine. But the things Biden was saying and doing in 2020 were indicators of real problems, cognitive problems that they all knew. I've gone through this before. I'm not going to outline this again, but I've gone through this in great, painstaking detail that they knew. They, the Democrat Party power brokers, knew in 2020 when they selected Biden to run against Trump, they knew what they were risking. They knew then the man was going to be on a cognitive decline. He was not doing well even at the time cognitively. They did not care. In fact, I would suggest to you that I think that they kind of liked the idea of being able to have a guy in the Oval Office who was basically just a puppet. I think some of the folks who were really calling the shots liked that. They weren't going to get opposition from him because he was just there as the person that they propped up. As sad as that is a sad, sad thing. Anyway, but just because Trump is 79, it does not mean that he is incapable. He's incompetent. He's in cognitive decline. It can mean that, but it doesn't mean that as a necessity. It's not necessarily the case. In fact, Trump is, if you compare them side by side, Trump's constantly, I don't know that there's a day that goes by that Trump isn't in the media or out there on social media making commentary or whatever else. The guy is always in the limelight. This is, again, we saw Biden go MIA for long periods of time, long periods of time. If you can compare and contrast these, it's not even close. Trump never wandered off in the backdrop of a meeting on the national stage with other countries at a G7 or whatever it was, like Biden did. Biden did a photo op and then started wandering back into the vast open prairie. I don't know what was going on there, but he was face planting at speeches. He had trouble. He regularly fell up or whatever the steps going to Air Force One. I know Trump has stumbled before as well. Again, there's a difference between someone stumbling as an accident versus someone stumbling repeatedly because he can't keep his balance at all. Biden tipped over riding a bicycle. He stopped the bicycle to talk to reporters, and as he was stopping, he tipped over. I've gone through all this. I don't mean to belabor this. I'm simply saying that this is a subtle attempt to undermine the authority, the health, the ability for Trump to remain as commander-in-chief. They're laying these kind of, they're putting out little hints. They're dropping the breadcrumbs, so to speak. Anyway, going back to the article here, it says the image inspired, the image that Trump posted on social media, Truth Social. It was an AI-generated image. That image was inspired by Apocalypse Now, showing Trump as Robert Duvall's character in the Francis Ford Coppola-directed film, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore. While Coppola's 1979 movie takes place in South Vietnam and Cambodia in the Vietnam War era, Trump's AI parody depicts Chicago with the city's skyline peppered with helicopters. In the image, the president is also backdropped by a city beach covered with fire and smoke, seemingly imitating an active war zone. Trump accompanied the AI image, which also parodies the title of the war movie, Chipocalypse Now, which is with a threatening message, a nod to his plan to bring the National Guard to Chicago, a move that comes amid his ongoing militarization of Washington, D.C. This is one way to frame what's happening in Washington, D.C., the militarization of the city. Certainly he's brought in the troops, National Guard, but what's happened, they didn't come in to storm the city. They didn't take over buildings. They didn't force people out of their homes. They didn't demand that the people living in the city of Washington, D.C., quarter these soldiers, as we've seen that the founders, of course, were concerned about this sort of stuff because it had happened in the history of the world. Soldiers just coming in and taking over homes by force. And this is not the sort of thing that's happening. You have a presence in Washington, D.C. that is designed to deter crime, support law enforcement, and put an end to the violence. To me, the real question is, and I've said this on here I've never once said that Trump should just send in the National Guard. My question has always been whether and why you would refuse this. If you were Pritzker, if you were Brandon Johnson, if you were cities and states around the country that have real crime problems, if you were the mayor of Indianapolis, why would you oppose this? If you're really for the safety of your citizens, why would you oppose it? What is the great risk? What liberty are we giving up? We are allowing people who are playing support roles in the National Guard to come in and to support efforts to get rid of the law enforcement's efforts to get rid of crime in our cities. What is the risk? Now, Pritzker's out there saying all sorts of things, that this is a precursor to Trump trying to take over and commandeer the election in 2026, which today's Todd Talk wasn't directly about that, but the Todd Talk was about a dog. There's been a woman registered her dog to vote in the People's Republic of California. He or she, but the dog cast 2 ballots, one in 2021, one in 2022. She's facing felony charges for this. But this is, we're told that we have all this election integrity, and we're told that Trump is trying to overthrow elections, and that's what they're kind of setting the stage for that narrative as we move closer to 2026, especially as we talk about things like redistricting to try to gain more Republican seats, or in the case of California, more Democrat seats in the midterm. So, got to take a little bit of a pause here, my friends, as I get toward the end here of this, the first segment of the program. Let's be honest, friends, when your financial world starts to get a little more complicated, you need more than just the standard one-size-fits-all approach. You need more than even the customized approach that says that someone's only focused on one particular aspect of helping you manage your money. You need a team of people that can manage all different types of aspects of leaving a legacy, of building your wealth and leaving that legacy behind. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics. For private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning, Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team to guide you every step of the way so that you can focus on what matters most to you, your family, your goals, your future. Want real confidence in your financial life, my friends? Visit FullSuiteWealth.com. That's FullSuiteWealth.com. Build your legacy. Secure your future. All right, so let's go back. Well, let's pause here. The narrative here is that Trump is threatening war on the city of Chicago, which, okay, that's your interpretation of this. There will be no war with the city of Chicago. What is Trump saying? Trump is saying that there is a war, metaphorical war going on, a cold war of sorts between states like Illinois, between cities like Chicago, and the federal government. We've seen this, by the way. This should not be surprising, and this should not be news to anyone. This is an organized effort. This is something that is consistently, continually something that is happening in this country. You have states and cities who are doing everything in their power to thwart the federal government's role in enforcing federal law, especially things like immigration law. They've done everything in their power to prevent them from being able to enforce the law. They have made it difficult. They have warned people. They've given them heads up that enforcement's coming. That's where we are right now, basically warning all these folks to watch out because ICE is coming in. And Trump's saying, hey, I'm going to send in the National Guard. So, got to take a break here, up against the clock in the first segment. Sit tight, my friends. You're listening to Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I am your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Talking here about what's happening in the city of Chicago. Trump is, he said that it's war. And again, you have to give... you have to understand what he's trying to communicate here. I know some people are going to assume, some people are probably genuinely afraid that Trump is going to send in a military force, which is preposterous. That is not going to happen. Trump's not going to go to war with Brandon Johnson and Governor Pritzker. There is a type of war that's happening. It's a type of war for the enforcement of our law. And that's really what this comes down to. You can say a lot of things about Trump. You can say you don't like the rhetoric. You can say that he's turning up the intensity on this, and I would grant you that. But you have to look at the totality of the picture. We are a nation of laws. You know, it's interesting to me. We don't pledge loyalty to a king. We don't have that here in this country. We have a nation of laws. We have the rule of law. We have the Constitution, which tells us what our federal government is allowed to do. And then we have the laws that they pass. Those laws can be held up against the Constitution to determine if it's even something that they can do. We can challenge those laws in court if they affect us, if they take away our liberty or whatever. But we're a nation of laws. We're a nation that has to follow the law. I'm not a guy. That's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of there being tons of laws. Because the more laws that there are, especially when they're not laws about the moral code, especially when they're laws about just laws that help the government manage its administrative state. Those sorts of laws that you wouldn't even necessarily know that you're breaking because A, no one even informs you of some of these things. B, you don't know where to get that information. C, there's so many administrative laws that it's impossible even to keep them straight. They vary from city to city, state to state, whatever. But the left likes those types of laws. The left likes laws that try to regulate freedom. I like laws that say this is something that is, harmful to someone's life, liberty, and personal property, pursuit of happiness, and there has to be consequences for this. I don't like setting up a bunch of laws that try to prevent people from being able to commit that crime because all that ends up doing is infringing upon other people's ability to live their lives, right? It's like saying, well, all people who commit this sort of crime have a driver's license. So then are you going to make it harder to get driver's licenses because someone might use their driver's license to commit some heinous evil instead of just trying to figure out, to use law enforcement and the laws on the books to actually deter crime, to hold people accountable when they break the crime? Who are the people who are out here, by the way, who are constantly excusing the criminals? I see that a lot on the left. Anytime that there's a shooting, God forbid, a shooting of someone who's had an encounter with law enforcement, the left is immediately, especially if the race is a certain race or ethnicity is a certain ethnicity, they automatically assume that the person who was harmed was in the right, that they were innocent. And they have fallen for this time and time again, from Michael Brown, you name it, on down the line of people who did things that put law enforcement officers in very bad positions, having to make a choice to use deadly force to protect themselves. Listen, if there's cases, and I'm sure that there are, to whatever degree there are cases where law enforcement officers have done things that are illegal or immoral, where they've actually not been justified in using force, then I want these folks held accountable. And I know that there certainly is that. But law enforcement is not waking up each day thinking about how they can physically take the life of another human being. That's just not the case. And if they are, that person needs to be summarily dismissed immediately. If they've committed crimes, they need to be held accountable. This is not complicated, but the left is constantly on the side of the law breaker. They refuse to call people who are in this country illegal aliens. They call them undocumented people, undocumented migrants. What does that mean? They're not documented because they're not legally allowed to be here. And when you couple that with a small percentage of those that commit violent, heinous crimes, these crimes fall at the feet. They're the responsibility of our government. And Trump is actually taking responsibility for this and trying to fix it. He's done a tremendous job at securing our border, at getting rid of illegal aliens, people who are not supposed to be here legally. And he is getting met with opposition basically everywhere he turns, in cities like Chicago, in cities like Los Angeles, in other blue cities around the country. And while cities do not have to provide resources to cooperate with ICE and Border Patrol and that sort of thing, they certainly shouldn't be using taxpayer funds to interfere with it as well, to go out of their way, to do something that is completely obvious and not even a problem. If you detain somebody who ICE is looking for and is trying to deport, why would you try to keep that information from them? Not even take the responsibility to say, hey, I've got to make sure I let you know this. I'm saying if you know they're looking for them, why would you intentionally try to keep them from knowing? It's obvious what's going on here. And when Trump talks about there being a war with Chicago, it's a war over who's going to be following the rule of law. And Chicago is Chicago is a mess. A lot of our cities are a mess. And I've run into a lot of people on social media who like to point out that there's other cities that are worse than Chicago or worse than Washington, D.C. or whatever. And the reality in my mind that pops up is, okay, so then you want to start there? Why are you against helping to stop crime in Chicago? I commented to one person on social media, between not trying to defend the lives of people in blue cities and aborting as many Democrats, I mean, the folks that are pro-choice that are out there aborting babies, the most are people who are on the left side of the aisle voting for Democrats to support these heinous and wicked ideas. They're going to be decreasing the population of people in their own party. What is going on here? I don't want to see people of any political background harmed. And it looks as though the Democrats, certain leftists online, don't even want help in their own cities. And why? Because they hate Trump that much? Because they refuse to enforce the law that much? Because they refuse to stand up for what is good and defend against the people who are committing heinous acts of evil? What is going on here for this to even make sense? I'm not arguing that Trump should just push the National Guard in to whatever degree he can use them to enforce the law, to enforce immigration's support and that sort of thing, and to whatever degree he can get mayors and governors, well, specifically governors, to be open to working with them on a statewide level, then that's fine. If there's any other way to do it, that's fine. But if he's going to be sending in the National Guard without the permission of the city or whatever, the governor, then I understand the problem with that. But my question is, why do they have a problem with it? Why? What has happened? Point me to something that has happened that has been so terrible about Washington, D.C. since Trump sent in the National Guard and took over law enforcement there. What has happened that makes this so terrifying? The only thing that I can see that's happened is that violent crime has been cleaned up. And if violent crime is cleaned up, I mean, what are they afraid of being made known just how much they've not paid attention and tried to stop crime when running these cities? What is their problem here? People are suffering. People are dying. People are being victims of violent crime. Why would you not try to stop this? I'll leave that up to you to determine your answers to those questions, my friends. Freedom Marketplace. Freedom Marketplace is something we've launched here at the Todd Huff Show. In fact, really quickly, I'll tell you that when we launched it, the initial thought was as we grew and as we got more advertisers and sponsors on the program, we used to list everybody on the website, but it got too busy, too messy. And so I realized we needed a searchable directory so people could find people that support this program, that are pushing in the same direction they are, that they could do business with. And so we launched this directory. And in the process of launching it, I thought, you know what, we can offer other businesses the opportunity to list themselves there as well so that people can have a handy place to go to get businesses that are pushing in the same direction they are politically, that are standing up for truth, that are defending American principles, that are not giving to woke candidates and woke causes. That's where Freedom Marketplace was born. FreedomMarketplace.net is where you can go, my friends. That's where you can go to find out more information, to shop businesses that are, again, aligned with your values. FreedomMarketplace.net, liberty and business for all. Friends, I'm going to end our conversation here about Trump and Chicago. We'll see where this all goes. Trump's also mentioned Portland. I don't know if you heard that over the weekend, saying how he had been watching television and saw that it was worse than he ever realized. He didn't know the stuff that was going on there was still going on. Anyway, I'm going to shift gears. I don't have a ton of time. The last segment is the shortest. I just want to share really quickly a story about what the Smithsonian's doing. I know I had to skip the Mamdani interview. I just didn't have time to get that in, but I want to tell you about what the Smithsonian's doing and what I ran into at Jamestown, Virginia. Oh my goodness, probably 15 years ago or so with my wife. I'll tell you that story on the other side of the break, my friend. Sit tight. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of the program. Shifting gears here a little bit. This final segment, which we'll get to as quickly as possible. My friends, think about this for a moment. Our investments are like seeds that we plant. They grow, they multiply, but are they bearing the kind of fruit that you want? And I don't just mean profits, which is, of course, very much the purpose of an investment, but I also mean, are you investing in the types of things that you want to see in your culture, in your society. At 48 Financial, they believe our money should reflect our values. They specialize in wealth management and biblically responsible investing, screening out companies that do not align with our faith. It's all part of their purpose-centered financial planning, helping us to live a life of meaning and purpose. If you want to see if your investments currently, the ones that you have now, if those align with your values, just visit 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. And you can take that assessment. I've done it. It's very quick and easy to do. 48financial.com/Todd. They're here to worry about your money so that you do not have to. All right. So, quickly here, AP story. You may have seen this floating around out there. I got to get to this quickly. White House review of Smithsonian content could reach into classrooms nationwide. Written by Micaiah Seminara. High school history teacher Katharina Matro often pulls materials from the Smithsonian Institution website as she assembles her lessons. She trusts its materials, which don't require the same level of vetting as other online sources. She uses documents and other primary sources it curates for discussions of topics like genocide and slavery. As the White House presses for changes at the Smithsonian, she's worried she may not be able to rely on it in the same way. We don't want a partisan history. I don't either, Ms. Matro, a teacher in Bethesda, Maryland. She says, we want the history that's produced by real historians. Wait a minute. What do you mean? The history that's produced by the real historians. This is something that scientists, that leftists in the scientific community do. What do? They set up a bunch of rules that say scientists believe these things. And then if you're a scientist who believes something that's not in the list, list of approved beliefs, then you're not a scientist. You're not a real scientist, which means you're not a real leftist. This is how this operates. What does that mean? I don't want real historians or fake historians, giving us history as well. But I would maintain that a lot of these historians have had an axe to grind. They hate this country. I remember when I was in college, I found my own research. I found that someone who had quoted the Virginia Declaration, what was that called? Declaration of Man. They had changed it. The source I was referencing, a book I had referenced, had changed it. There were references to God in Jefferson's original declaration that had been removed. And the book didn't quote that. Now, why? Is that real historians? No, that's not real historians. So here's the problem. The problem is, and I'm going to illustrate it with this story. The problem is that you have an angle of American history that paints America as this evil empire. Listen, there is no doubt that slavery is an absolute stain on this nation. It is evil. The type of slavery America had was absolutely reprehensible. It was horrible. It was a direct violation of the words that they penned in the Declaration of Independence. I don't know how to make this any clearer. It was evil. It was wicked. It was unacceptable, but it happened. It happened, and we need to know that it happened. We need to understand that that's part of our history. I don't want any of this whitewashed from our history, but I don't also want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't want to say that because America had slavery that nothing else that she did in her founding was good, because that is simply not the case. Keep in mind that the slavery that was ended was ended by the same people who call themselves Americans that grew up in this system that at one time had slavery. We had mechanisms by which we could fix this. We had heroes who did what was right and freed the slaves. Listen, I don't have time to get into all that. I'd like to have so much more to say about this. I should have saved this for a longer segment. But let me tell you this in closing. Several years ago, my wife and I went to Jamestown. At the time, I didn't know. I had always been told I was a descendant of Pocahontas and John Rolfe as well. But I didn't know this for a fact. So we were there, Jamestown, Virginia, and I didn't know it. I wished I would have. I would have had a lot more fun visiting. But as we're at Jamestown, they have these placards as you walk around the park or museum or whatever it's called. You're outside, and there's these placards, and they would say stuff like, I kid you not, before the white European settler arrived, the sturgeon in the rivers were the size of, Amazon crocodiles. Today, they're just the size of minnows. Do you think America was better or worse before the arrival of the white settler, of the European settler? I kid you not. That's what it says. So this is the problem that people like Trump, people like me, have with this. What is the purpose of this? You can state the facts. You can point to the changes. By the way, I remember saying that museum wouldn't have existed without the arrival of the European settler. Anyway, I'm out of time. Folks, have a great day. Thanks for listening. SDG.